Hello and welcome to our mini worship for the Kemble Sarawak Zion-Keppel Pastoral Charge for Sunday, August 8th. I'm recording on Sunday, August 8th afternoon. We had our first in-person worship service this morning, and we were lucky because the rain literally held off until the very last minute. And we were able to be on the side lawn. We had a wonderful turnout of folks, and it was a particularly special service as it marked our first in-person service since I arrived and since Christmas Eve for this pastoral charge. We thank Fred and Mary Ellen for leading the music and reading the scriptures, and we thank Lorraine for taking attendance so we can do the tracking, and we thank all those who came and joined with us in the sense of fellowship and belonging, and also with the musical instruments and the clapping, and just in the sense of celebration, of which there was plenty. And so on this first in-person worship service, it was lovely that we were outside because we actually were taking time to think about the images that God has given us in Scripture of the eagle, or of birds. And we kind of spent some time examining in children's conversation the Old Testament and the New Testament. I believe there's 59 different mentions of birds throughout the Bible. And as we did so, some birds started singing to our right, and even, someone tells me through the service, they heard an owl who started to hoot and in the distance as well. And so it all added much to our service. And just behind me was a bird's nest that has been home to at least 2 sets of new birds, babies hatched this summer. And so it felt especially spirit-filled, our time together, and we look forward to gathering again in person on the sideline next Sunday at 10:30, and we hope you're able to join us. One thing we talked about was the presence of eagles in the Grey Bruce area, and in fact, after the service, one gentleman came up and told me that just down the street from the Kemble Sarawak church is a big maple tree right on the fork of a road. And in that maple tree, there is often an eagle. So I know I'm going to go for a drive this week and see if I spot them. But we have noticed here in Owen Sound, and particularly over by Haibu Conservation Authority, that there has been a much larger presence of eagles than ever before. Sometimes we've had as many as 3 fly overhead at the same time. And even down on Highway 21, we witnessed one day driving over that there were 2 that flew overhead. And so in the 31 years that I've lived in Grey Bruce, there hasn't been very many eagles, and now there are so many. And they are such a magnificent looking bird, and they're so impressive. I mean, it's no wonder the Americans use the eagle as their symbol, as their national symbol. And it's no wonder that in our scriptures, God uses the eagle to be described as his love and as his care for us, and his wings which will cover us. And in Isaiah today, we hear of this protection and being safe under the wings, or to soar in the wings of an eagle. We looked at Psalm 91, verse 1 to 4, and then we took a look at Isaiah 40, verse 28 to 31. Now this past week, as I was preparing for this message, I did a little bit of reading, a bit more learning about what eagles are about, and I learned some things that made me even more impressed with this magnificent bird. For instance, I didn't know that the eagles, that they mate for life. I didn't know that the male eagle spends as much time sitting on the eggs as the female eagle does. And equal measure, they each take turns feeding the babies after they're born, after they hatch. And also they, in equal measure, train the eaglets so that they're ready to fly out of the nest and go on into their lives of their own. Both mother and father take on equal responsibility. But what impressed me the most was what I learned about the way that they build their nests. And I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to take a close look at an eagle's nest. I mean, they're quite large, and they're usually up really high in the tree. But at first, the eagle's nest looks soft and fluffy, and it's full of all these little downy feathers. And so when the eggs are laid, they're laid into this soft little nest. But after the eaglets are born, and as they grow and get bigger, the mom and the dad, they pick out the fluffy feathers and they throw them out the side of the nest. And underneath those fluffy feathers, they have purposely placed sticks and stones and little pieces of glass so that the nest increasingly becomes uncomfortable, so that the eaglets have no choice but to fly out of the nest and start on their own lives. And I thought it was just brilliant. It reminded me back a few years ago when there were commercials. If you couldn't get your adult children to move out, you were supposed to stop cooking with cheese. Well, same kind of idea. Now, in a way, what we read in Isaiah today in chapter 40 is exactly what making the nest uncomfortable is what Isaiah is warning us about. You see, in our reading today, Isaiah is teaching us that sometimes life will be tough and we will need to find ways to cope. That life isn't going to always be spent in a cozy, warm, soft nest. In today's passage, Isaiah is writing to the people of Israel and Judah, who were taken from the comforts of their own home, if you can imagine, and they were made to go to Babylon, where they were turned into slaves, and they lost everything, including their sense of freedom. They needed to hear that God still cared for them and that there was still hope. And I believe that that is true for us even today. That there are situations that we find ourselves in that leave us feeling captive and hopeless. I mean, health issues, financial situations, relationships that break down, a pandemic that seems to go on forever and ever 18 months later. And sometimes it's just the routine of everyday living that can just sap the life out of us and can leave us feeling exhausted and a little less than enthused. But that's where the words of Isaiah should buoy us up. I mean, today he reminds us of an everlasting God, an everlasting strength that can be ours. I mean, he writes in Isaiah 40, verse 28 to 31, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. He gives strength to the weary, and he increases the power of the weak. But those whose hope is in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and they will not be faint." I mean, here lies the secret that Isaiah is teaching us today. You see, in our scriptures, we learn that some of those who were in exile, they had lost hope. And because they lost hope, they also lost their strength and their desire to go on. Even the young were beaten down and weary and defeated. Except, we read that those who placed their hope and trust in God, they did not lose heart. They did not lose strength, regardless of their age. Their hearts and minds soared as they thought about what God was up to, what God was going to do next. And as new strength and courage entered their hearts, it began to affect their bodies, and they gained new enthusiasm for life and new strength to go on. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff. It's about us knowing that what we focus our energy on is what grows. And so when we focus on the goodness of God, that goodness grows in our lives. It reminds me of a story I heard this week of a grandson who was visiting his grandparents, and he found a little baby bird in the field. Took it back to the farm and he placed it in amongst the chicks. But it was pretty evident that this little bird was not a baby chicken, for it quickly outgrew the chicks. And then one day something quite amazing happened. A father eagle was flying overhead and happened to notice this strange bird amongst the chickens, and it began to squeal and squawk and circle lower. And here the little bird looked up and answered the call. You see, the little bird was a baby eaglet. And it wasn't long until he had his wings out and he too was up soaring along with the father eagle. Now the baby chicks, they also heard the father calling, but they just kept pecking away at the corn. But the eaglet, he had within his spirit enough to know to soar like that eagle. He had within him the spirit of an eagle, and so he too soared. See, chickens and turkeys, they can fly, but they rarely do because they're most comfortable on the ground. Sparrows and other small birds fly, but they mostly use their wings to get from one tree to another. But eagles, they soar. They have great power and freedom, and they are destined for the skies. They are destined, like we are, those who serve the Lord and have a different spirit in us, to look upwards and to focus on what is above and what is beyond, not just contented to be ground dwellers. So may we all have within us the spirit to look up to look for the Spirit of God, to look for the goodness and to focus on that, for it will strengthen us, it will uphold us, and it'll make every trial that we face a whole lot more bearable. And that's why God is the everlasting God. And so as you go out into your week, may you go knowing you do not go alone, for God is with you, and may that knowledge strengthen you. And we'll see you next